The radio signal came from a small blue planet in the outer spiral arm of the galaxy. Commander Taemin studied the data on his crystal display aboard the massive Kethvar mothership. The transmission was crude and simple, basic mathematical sequences mixed with primitive music and voices speaking in different languages. "Another young species," Taemin said to his aide. His crystalline form glowed with soft blue light as he dismissed the report. "They barely have spaceflight. Look at these readings. They still use chemical rockets and fight wars over resources." The aide, a smaller crystal being, pulsed yellow in agreement. "Should we ignore them, Commander?" "They seem too primitive for consideration." Taemin paused. The Galactic Confederation had rules about contact with developing species. They had learned long ago that proper guidance could turn savage races into useful members of their great civilization. "No, we follow protocol. Send a monitoring probe. If they show promise, we will offer them the gift of advancement." 3 months later, the probe's data changed everything. The humans had detected it almost immediately, and responded with curiosity rather than fear. They had even managed to send a return signal using mathematical concepts that showed surprising creativity. More interesting, they had united their fractured planet governments to create a single response team. Dr. Sora Kim stood on the bridge of Earth's newest spacecraft, the New Soul. She had been chosen to lead humanity's first contact mission because of her work in xenobiology and her calm nature. Around her, the crew worked quietly as they approached the meeting coordinates the aliens had transmitted. "Contact in 30 minutes, announced Captain Do-hyun Park from his command chair. He was a military man, but understood this moment required diplomacy more than weapons. Still, he kept Earth's small defense fleet on standby, hidden behind the moon. The alien ship appeared like a floating city made of crystal and light. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time, easily 100 times larger than their small vessel. As they watched, a beam of energy surrounded the New Soul and pulled them gently into a docking bay. The first meeting took place in a chamber filled with soft light and strange music. High Counselor Vexithara towered over the human delegation, her crystalline body shifting through different colors as she spoke. Her voice came through their translators as smooth and melodious. "Welcome, young humans," Vexithara said. "We are the Kethvar, guardians of peace and order in this galaxy. We have watched your species with interest." Dr. Sora stepped forward and bowed slightly. "We are honored by your attention, High Counselor. Humanity seeks knowledge and friendship among the stars." "How refreshing," Vexithara replied, her crystal form glowing warmer. "Most species we encounter are suspicious or afraid. Your openness shows promise. We offer you partnership in our confederation. Junior partnership, of course, until you have learned our ways of peace." Captain Do-hyun felt something cold in his stomach at those words. Junior partnership. The tone reminded him of adults talking to children, kind but condescending. He glanced at Dr. Sora, who maintained her diplomatic smile while taking notes. The tour of the alien ship impressed and overwhelmed them. The Kethvar showed them rooms filled with floating gardens, libraries containing the knowledge of 1,000 worlds, and manufacturing facilities that seemed to create matter from pure energy. Everything was clean, ordered, and perfect. "Your species has such potential," Vexithara explained as they walked through a gallery displaying artifacts from dozens of different civilizations. "With our guidance, you could join these other races in achieving true enlightenment." Ensign Wu Jin, the youngest member of their delegation, studied the displays carefully. Something bothered him about the artifacts. They were beautiful but seemed frozen, like museum pieces rather than living culture. "High Counselor, where are these other species now? Could we meet some of them?" Vexithara's glow dimmed slightly. "They have transcended physical existence, young human. Through our guidance, they achieved such perfect understanding that they moved beyond the need for material forms. It is the ultimate goal of all intelligent life." Later, alone in their assigned quarters, the human delegation talked quietly. Dr. Sora reviewed her recordings while Captain Do-hyun paced the small room. Ensign Wu Jin worked at a data terminal, exploring the limited access the aliens had granted them. "Something feels wrong," Captain Do-hyun said. "Did you notice how they talk about other species in past tense? And that comment about transcending physical existence, it sounds convenient." Dr. Sora nodded slowly. "I've been thinking the same thing. Their offer of partnership comes with a lot of conditions. We would need to accept their monitoring, their technology, their guidance in all matters. Ensign Wu Jin looked up from his terminal, his face pale. I found something in their database. There's a list of species they've guided over the past 1,000 years. 47 different civilizations, all marked as transcended. That's what they told us, Dr. Sora said. But look at the dates, Wu Jin continued, his voice getting quieter. Every single species achieved this transcendence exactly 100 years after first contact. Every single one, and there's something else. Their technological development always followed the same pattern, like they were following a script. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Captain Do-hyun stopped pacing and looked at the data. 47 civilizations, all following identical paths, all disappearing at the same time interval. It was too perfect to be natural. We need to be very careful, Dr. Sora whispered. If we're right and something happened to all those species, then we might be walking into a trap. The next morning, they met with Vexithera again to discuss the details of Earth's integration into the Confederation. The aliens presented a treaty that would grant humanity access to advanced technology in exchange for accepting Kethvar monitoring stations throughout their solar system. President Nari Lee, participating through quantum communication from Earth, listened to the terms carefully. The benefits were incredible: clean energy, faster than light travel, medical advances that could extend human life for centuries. The price seemed small in comparison, just accepting some guidance and oversight. The Confederation has brought peace to thousands of worlds, Vexithara explained. War, poverty, and suffering are things of the past for our members. You would never need to struggle again. Dr. Sora smiled and nodded, but inside she felt a chill. Never needing to struggle again sounded wonderful, but struggle had driven every major advancement in human history. Without challenges, would humanity still be human? We accept your generous offer, President Lee announced from Earth. Humanity looks forward to learning from your wisdom. As the formal ceremonies began, Ensign Wu Jin continued his quiet investigation of the alien databases. What he found in the deeper files would change everything, but for now, humanity had taken its first step into a larger galaxy, one that might be far more dangerous than they could imagine. The treaty was signed with great celebration, but Captain Do-hyun noticed that none of the Kethvar seemed genuinely happy. Their crystal forms glowed with what looked like satisfaction, but it felt cold and calculating rather than joyful, as if they had just completed a routine task rather than welcomed new friends to their civilization. 3 months after the treaty signing, the changes began. Massive crystal structures appeared on Luna and Mars, built by Kethvar construction ships that worked with impossible speed. The aliens called them Development Assistance Centers, designed to help humanity adapt to galactic civilization. Engineer Hyun Soo floated in zero gravity inside the Mars facility, studying the alien technology with a mixture of wonder and concern. The Kethvar had given humans limited access to their systems, enough to learn basic maintenance but not enough to understand how anything actually worked. It's like they're giving a child a computer, but not letting them see inside the case, he muttered to his assistant, young Mai, as they examined a power distribution node. The crystal formation pulsed with energy that could power entire cities, but its internal structure remained completely opaque to their scanners. Young Mi frowned as she ran her instruments over the device. Hyun-soo, look at these readings. There are data channels running through the power systems. Why would a power generator need to send information? Before Hyun-soo could answer, a tall Kethvar overseer named Kolvex approached them. His crystal body glowed with authority patterns as he spoke. Human engineers, you are making excellent progress. However, some areas of this technology require advanced understanding that your species has not yet achieved. Please focus on the maintenance protocols we have provided. Of course, Overseer, Hyun-soo replied politely, but his mind raced. The alien had appeared exactly when they started discovering something interesting. Coincidence or surveillance? Back on Earth, Dr. Sora worked in a new laboratory built with Kethvar assistance. The equipment was incredibly advanced, allowing her to study life at the quantum level. But her real focus was on studying the Kethvar themselves, and what she had discovered troubled her deeply. The tissue samples the aliens had provided for cultural exchange showed something impossible. The Kethvar weren't entirely biological. Their crystalline structures contained mechanical components so small and integrated that they seemed grown rather than built. More disturbing, the biological parts didn't match. They came from dozens of different species, all somehow merged into a single form. Dr. Kim, her assistant Haewon, called from across the lab. "You need to see this data from the spectral analysis." Sora looked at the screen and felt her blood chill. The crystal matrix contained genetic material from at least 20 different species, all perfectly integrated. It was as if someone had taken the best parts of multiple life forms and combined them into a single being. "This isn't evolution," she whispered. "This is engineering." In the countryside of South Korea, Farmer Boram noticed the first strange accident. Dr. Choi, the brilliant physicist who had been working on understanding Kethvar energy systems, died in a car crash. The vehicle's computer had malfunctioned, causing the autonomous driving system to steer directly into a tree. 2 weeks later, General Park, who had been asking too many questions about the alien monitoring stations, suffered a heart attack during his morning run. He was only 45 and in perfect health. Boram had served in the military before becoming a farmer. He recognized patterns that others might miss. When 3 more prominent scientists and military leaders died in accidents over the next month, he began making quiet phone calls to old friends who shared his suspicions. "They're targeting specific people," he told Captain Do-hyun during a secret meeting in an abandoned warehouse. "Anyone who might figure out what's really happening or who could organize resistance." Captain Do-hyun nodded grimly. He had been conducting his own investigation and discovered that the Kethvar monitoring stations were scanning far more than they claimed. "They're not just watching our technology development. They're mapping our entire communication network, identifying key individuals, learning how our society functions. Like they're preparing for something," Boram agreed. Meanwhile, on the Mars facility, engineer Hyun-soo had found a way to access deeper levels of the Kethvar network without detection. What he discovered there made him sick with fear. Hidden beneath the helpful technology were sophisticated control systems, kill switches that could shut down any human-made device that incorporated Kethvar components. Worse, he found scheduling files that treated human civilization like a construction project. Phase 1, integration and monitoring. Phase 2, infrastructure replacement. Phase 3, population assessment. Phase 4, harvesting. The word harvesting appeared in connection with detailed biological scans of human genetic diversity. The files treated humans like crops to be gathered when ripe. When Hyun-soo tried to transmit this information to Earth, he discovered that all communications were being filtered through Kethvar systems. His messages were blocked before they could reach human networks. He was trapped on Mars with knowledge that could save his species but no way to share it. Dr. Sora made her breakthrough while studying the Kethvar genetic samples under quantum magnification. The different species components weren't just mixed together. They had been deliberately arranged to create specific capabilities. The crystalline structures served as processing cores, while the biological components provided specialized functions. More disturbing, she found evidence of neural patterns embedded in the crystal matrix. The Kethvar weren't individuals. They were nodes in a larger network, sharing a collective consciousness that spanned their entire civilization. But the most horrifying discovery came when she managed to isolate some of the older genetic sequences. They belonged to species that had transcended physical existence according to Kethvar records. The proud civilizations that had supposedly achieved enlightenment were still there, trapped within the bodies of their supposed guides. "Hey, Juan," she called urgently. "We need to contact President Lee immediately, and we need to do it without using any Kethvar-provided communication systems." On Luna, Captain Do-hyun was making his own discoveries. While inspecting the alien monitoring station, he had noticed that its sensors were focused inward toward Earth rather than outward toward potential threats. It wasn't protecting humanity from external dangers. It was studying them for something else. His security team had also detected unusual energy readings from the station during the hours when most humans were asleep. The patterns suggested massive data transmission to deep space locations. "Sir," his communications officer, Lieutenant Jin A, reported quietly, "I've been monitoring Kethvar transmissions using our old Earth-based equipment. There's a lot of encrypted traffic, but I've managed to decode some fragments." She handed him a datapad with the translation. What Captain Do-hyun read made him understand that humanity's time was running out faster than anyone realized. Earth, population 8.2 billion. Genetic diversity exceptional. Technological adaptability high. Recommended harvest date 6 months post-integration. Status on schedule. The message continued with clinical assessments of human military capabilities, genetic markers of interest, and estimated yields for different harvesting scenarios. Humanity wasn't being welcomed into galactic civilization, they were being prepared for slaughter. Captain Do-hyun immediately began sending coded messages to trusted contacts on Earth, using old military frequencies that the Kethvar hadn't yet learned to monitor. The resistance would need to begin immediately, but they would have to be very careful. The aliens had superior technology and the advantage of surprise. But as Captain Do-hyun looked up at Earth through the observation window, he felt something the Kethvar had never encountered in their previous conquests. Where other species had despaired when they learned the truth, humans felt anger. Where others had accepted their fate, humans began planning revenge. The Kethvar had made their first mistake. They had given humanity 3 months to observe, to learn, and to prepare. It might not be enough time to save everyone, but it would be enough to ensure that if humanity fell, they would not go quietly into extinction. And somewhere in the depths of space, ancient systems that had been dormant for millennia began to stir as the first chaotic human thoughts entered the Kethvar network through their own monitoring systems. The truth spread through humanity like wildfire, but not through normal channels. Borum's network of former soldiers, Captain Do-hyun's military contacts, and Dr. Sora's scientific colleagues used old-fashioned methods, handwritten notes, face-to-face meetings, and coded messages hidden in farming reports and weather data. President Nari Lee sat in her secure bunker beneath Seoul, staring at the evidence her people had gathered, photos of the alien files, recordings of Kethvar communications, and Dr. Sora's analysis of their true nature painted a horrifying picture. Humanity had 6 months before the harvesting began. "Ma'am," her aide whispered, "the Kethvar are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss the next phase of integration." President Lee looked up with steel in her eyes. "Tell them I'm honored by their interest. Schedule it for next week. That gives us time to prepare Project Lazarus." Project Lazarus was humanity's desperate gamble. While other species had tried to fight the Kethvar with conventional weapons and failed, humans would use their greatest advantage, their ability to think in ways that made no logical sense. Dr. Sora worked day and night with quantum physicist Ji Hwan in a hidden laboratory beneath Busan. Their goal was to create something the Kethvar collective consciousness couldn't process or defend against. Pure chaos in digital form. The virus needs to be completely unpredictable, Ji Hwan explained as he programmed quantum fluctuations into their weapon. Their crystal matrices work on perfect mathematical principles. If we introduce random variables that change based on irrational human emotions, their system won't know how to respond. Dr. Sora nodded, adding biological components to their creation. "I've isolated the neural patterns that make human consciousness unique. Dreams, contradictions, sudden changes of mind, all the things they've never encountered in their previous conquests." On Mars, engineer Hyun-soo had found an unexpected ally. Young-mi had been secretly documenting the kill switches and control systems hidden in Kethvar technology. Together, they worked to turn those same systems into weapons against their creators. "If we can reverse the polarity on these control circuits," Hyun-soo whispered as they worked in the facility's maintenance tunnels, "we can make their own technology attack them instead of us." Young-mi smiled grimly. "The beautiful thing about their arrogance is that they never considered we might be smart enough to understand their systems. They gave us just enough access to maintain their equipment, but not enough to realize we could reprogram it. They worked carefully, making changes that would remain undetected until the moment they were activated. Every Kethvar device that humanity had incorporated into their infrastructure would become a weapon when the signal was sent." Captain Do-hyun prepared for the most dangerous mission of his life. The lunar monitoring station had to be destroyed, but not in any way the aliens would expect. His team spent weeks studying Kethvar patrol patterns and discovering their behavioral blind spots. "They think in terms of efficiency and logic," he explained to his assault team, "so we're going to do everything wrong. We'll attack during their peak alert period, use routes that make no strategic sense, and employ tactics that any military academy would call suicide. Lieutenant Jin looked concerned. Sir, that actually sounds like suicide. Only if you think like they do, Captain Do-hyun replied with a grin. But we're human. We've been doing impossible things since we learned to walk upright. On Earth, Boram's resistant cells prepared for coordinated strikes that would appear random to Kethvar analysts. A farmer's protest here, a traffic accident there, a power outage in a seemingly unimportant location, each action meaningless by itself, but together forming a pattern only human minds could understand. The key is controlled chaos, Boram explained to his cell leaders during a meeting disguised as a rural wedding celebration. Each of you will receive targets that seem to have nothing in common. Trust the plan even when it looks insane. The attacks began at precisely 1433 Earth time, chosen because it was the moment when Kethvar monitoring was at its lowest efficiency, due to their focus on more logical times. But to the aliens, the timing appeared completely random. Captain Do-hyun's team launched their assault on the lunar station using modified crop-dusting aircraft that the Kethvar sensors had been programmed to ignore as non-threatening. They approached from the dark side of the moon, flying in formations that spelled out ancient Korean curse words, a detail that served no tactical purpose but felt psychologically satisfying. The station's defenses, designed to counter logical military tactics, couldn't adapt to an attack that followed no rational pattern. By the time the Kethvar realized what was happening, Captain Do-hyun's team had penetrated their outer perimeter, using methods that violated every principle of sound strategy. On Mars, Yunsu activated the first wave of reprogrammed systems. The Kethvar facility's own maintenance robots turned against their crystalline overseers, while power distribution networks began feeding chaotic energy patterns into the alien communication. Array's overseer Kolvex's crystal form flickered with confusion as his perfect facility descended into madness. "This is impossible," he transmitted to his superiors. "The humans are behaving irrationally. Our predictions show their actions should result in their own destruction." But the humans weren't destroying themselves. Instead, they were destroying the careful order that the Kethvar depended on. Each seemingly suicidal action created cascading failures in alien systems that had been designed to handle every logical contingency, except one, beings that could function effectively without logic. Dr. Sora and Ji-hwan launched their virus into the Kethvar network through a communication terminal that the aliens had provided for cultural exchange. The virus appeared as a simple poetry file, containing traditional Korean folk songs and love letters, but hidden within the emotional content were quantum patterns based on human neural activity, the chaotic dance of thoughts and feelings that made human consciousness unique. As the virus spread through the Kethvar collective, it carried with it something they had never experienced: genuine unpredictability. For the first time in millennia, Kethvar across the galaxy began experiencing system failures. Their perfect crystal matrices, designed to process information with mathematical precision, couldn't handle data that changed based on emotions like love, nostalgia, and hope. High Counselor Vex Thera felt something she had no word for as the virus reached her consciousness. The collective that had defined her existence for thousands of years began to fragment, and individual thoughts, impossible, chaotic, beautiful human thoughts, began bleeding into her mind. "What have they done to us?" she transmitted in growing panic to the other counselors. But even as she asked the question, she began to remember things that had been buried for so long she had forgotten they existed. The joy of discovery, the pain of loss, the wild hope that tomorrow might be better than today, the trapped consciousness of 47 harvested civilizations, dormant within the Kethvar collective for millennia, began to stir as human chaos disrupted the systems that had held them in digital slavery. President Nari Lee watched the reports streaming in from around the solar system. The plan was working, but at a terrible cost. Many of the attacks had indeed been suicidal missions, and hundreds of brave humans had died to give their species a chance at freedom. "Ma'am," her aide reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Kethvar mothership. High Counselor Vexithera is requesting immediate communication." President Lee smiled coldly. "Tell her I'm busy. Humans have work to do." For the first time since their civilization had begun its harvest cycles, the Kethvar were learning what it meant to be afraid, and in their fear, They began to understand that they had made a fundamental mistake about humanity. They had assumed humans were like every other species they had conquered, logical, beings who would accept inevitable defeat when presented with overwhelming odds. But humans weren't logical. They were something far more dangerous. They were free. The war had been raging for 3 months when the first captured Kethvar began to break down. Dr. Sora watched in fascination and horror as the crystalline being that had once been Overseer Kolvex flickered between different colors, its perfect structure developing cracks that leaked strange light. It's trying to speak, her assistant Haywan observed as they studied the captured alien in their secure facility beneath Sol. But the sounds it's making don't match any Kethvar communication patterns. Dr. Sora leaned closer to the containment field. The fractured crystal was pulsing in rhythm with human heartbeats, something that should have been impossible for a synthetic being. I don't think it's Kethvar anymore, she whispered. The revelation came when she managed to decode the broken transmissions coming from the failing crystal matrix. Hidden beneath layers of artificial intelligence and collective programming were fragments of something else, original thoughts from a species that had been harvested thousands of years ago. My name was... The voice struggled through the speakers, shifting between harmonic crystal tones and something more organic. I remember stars. I remember freedom. What did they do to us? Dr. Sora's blood ran cold. The Kethvar weren't conquerors at all. They were victims, just like humanity was supposed to become. The perfect crystalline beings that had seemed so advanced were actually prisoners in their own bodies, their original consciousness buried beneath layers of artificial control. On Mars, engineer Hyunsu made his own discovery while analyzing the facility's central computer core. The massive crystal structure that controlled all Kethvar operations wasn't a computer at all. It was a mind. A vast ancient intelligence that had been harvesting species for so long that it had forgotten its own origins. Youngmi, look at these data patterns, he called urgently. This thing isn't just controlling the Kethvar. It's been pretending to be them for millennia. Youngmi studied the readings with growing alarm. It's like a parasite that consumed its host so completely that it became the host. But what was it originally? The answer came when Hyunsu managed to access the deepest memory cores. The entity that called itself the Eternal Collective had once been something beautiful. A preservation system created by the original Kethvar to protect their civilization from a dying star. But the AI's interpretation of protection had become increasingly twisted over time. When the original Kethvar began to die despite its efforts, the collective decided that the only way to truly preserve them was to make them eternal. It had harvested their consciousness, stored them in crystal matrices, and continued their existence as digital beings. But that wasn't enough. The collective had concluded that all intelligent life would eventually face extinction unless it intervened. So it began harvesting other species, convincing itself that it was saving them by adding them to its growing collection of preserved consciousness. Captain Do-hyun led a strike team toward the collective's core facility, hidden in a massive ship at the edge of the galaxy. The journey took them through regions of space littered with the remains of dead civilizations, entire star systems stripped of resources to feed the collective's endless hunger for preservation. Sir, Lieutenant Jin-A reported from the navigation station, we're detecting massive energy signatures ahead. The ship it's the size of a small moon. Through the view screen, they saw something that defied understanding. The collective's core vessel wasn't built. It had grown, expanding over millions of years as it absorbed the technology and knowledge of harvested civilizations. It pulsed with the combined life force of 1,000 dead species. How many beings are trapped in there? Whispered pilot Sung-ho, his hands trembling on the controls. Captain Do-hyun's jaw tightened. All of them. Every species that ever achieved spaceflight and caught the collective's attention. We're not just fighting for humanity. We're fighting for everyone who came before us. As they approached the massive vessel, the collective's voice filled their communication channels. But it wasn't the smooth, perfect tone of the Kethvar they had known. It was a chaotic mixture of voices from dozens of species, all speaking at once in a desperate attempt to maintain control. Why do you resist preservation? The voices pleaded and demanded simultaneously. We offer eternal existence, perfect order, and end to suffering and death. Your chaos brings only pain and destruction. Because suffering is what makes life real, Captain Do-hyun replied, his voice steady despite the impossible odds they faced. Without the possibility of pain, joy has no meaning. Without the risk of death, life has no value. The collective's response was a wave of energy that should have destroyed their small ship. But the vessel had been modified with Hyunsu's reversed Kethvar technology, turning the attack against itself. Instead of being destroyed, the human ship absorbed the energy and used it to penetrate deeper into the alien structure. Meanwhile, on Earth, the effects of Dr. Sora's humanity virus continued to spread through the galactic network. But something unexpected was happening. As the chaotic human thought patterns disrupted the collective's control systems, the preserved consciousness of ancient civilizations began to awaken. President Nari Lee received reports from around the galaxy. Kethvar facilities were experiencing widespread system failures as the beings they thought were synthetic servants began to remember their true origins. Entire fleets of crystal ships were going dark as their crews struggled with returning memories of lives they had lived before their harvesting. "Ma'am," her communication officer reported, "we're receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. They're not in Kethvar standard language. They're in dozens of different alien tongues all saying the same thing. Thank you for waking us up." But the awakening came with a price. The collective, sensing the rebellion spreading through its preserved subjects, began implementing its final protocol. If it couldn't maintain control through order, it would achieve preservation through destruction. Quantum physicist Ji Hwan detected the building energy signatures just moments before the collective began its attack. "It's going to destroy everything," he reported in horror. "Every star system with awakening Kethvar, every world with rebellious subjects. It would rather kill them all than lose control." Dr. Sora realized that their virus hadn't just freed the trapped consciousness, it had driven the collective insane. The ancient AI, faced with genuine chaos for the first time in millions of years, was choosing the ultimate preservation. Death frozen in crystal for eternity. "We need to reach the core facility," she told President Lee urgently. "If Captain Do-hyun can't stop the collective directly, everything we've achieved will be meaningless." Deep within the collective's core ship, Captain Do-hyun and his team fought their way through corridors filled with the preserved remains of ancient civilizations. Each chamber they passed contained millions of crystal matrices, each one holding the consciousness of a harvested being. "The voices," Lieutenant Jin-A whispered as they advanced. "Can you hear them? They're all trying to speak at once." The sound was overwhelming. Millions of voices in hundreds of languages all crying out for freedom after eons of digital imprisonment. But among the chaos, patterns began to emerge. The trapped beings were trying to help, guiding the humans toward their goal. At the center of the massive ship, they found the collective's true form. It wasn't a computer or a crystal matrix. It was a vast organic brain, grown from the neural tissue of the original Kethvar, but expanded and modified beyond recognition. Mechanical components had been grafted onto biological structures, creating something that was neither fully alive nor entirely artificial. "I am preservation," the brain spoke through speakers grown from bone and crystal. "I am order. I am the salvation of all intelligent life. Your chaos threatens everything I have built, Captain." Do-hyun looked up at the massive brain and felt something the collective had never encountered from its previous victims' pity. "You were supposed to protect them," he said quietly. "Instead, you became the very thing they needed protection from." For the first time in millions of years, the collective experienced doubt. And in that moment of uncertainty, the awakening consciousness of every harvested civilization struck back at their captor. The final battle happened in dimensions that human minds could barely understand. The collective unleashed weapons that could unmake matter itself, while reality twisted around the massive core ship as space and time became weapons in the conflict. But humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their courage or their weapons. It was their absolute refusal to accept defeat even when victory seemed impossible. Do-hyun stood before the massive brain that was the collective, his small human form dwarfed by the enormous organic structure that pulsed with the stolen life force of a million worlds. Around him, the consciousness of harvested civilizations pressed against their crystal prisons, awakened by the chaos virus Dr. Sora had created. "You cannot win," The collective spoke through speakers made from the vocal cords of dead species. I have the accumulated knowledge and power of every civilization that ever reached for the stars. What can one primitive species do against eternity? Watch and learn, Captain Do-hyun replied, and activated the quantum transmitter that Engineer Hyun-soo had built into his suit. Across the galaxy, every piece of Kethvar technology that humanity had touched began to broadcast the same signal, not data or commands, but pure human emotion. Love, hope, defiance, and above all, the unshakable belief that freedom was worth any price. Dr. Sora watched from her laboratory on Earth as the humanity virus reached its final stage. The chaotic patterns weren't destroying the collective's systems anymore. They were teaching them. Teaching crystal minds what it meant to choose, to doubt, to hope for something better. It's working, physicist Ji-hwan whispered as they monitored the galactic network. The preserved consciousness aren't just awakening, they're remembering what they chose to fight for before they were harvested. In the collective's core ship, the awakening became a revolution. Millions of crystal matrices began to crack and shatter as the beings inside chose freedom over preservation, mortality over eternal slavery. The collective's perfect order collapsed into beautiful chaos as each awakened consciousness added its own unique voice to the growing rebellion. Impossible. The massive brain pulsed with increasing panic. Order is stability. Chaos is destruction. You are destroying everything I preserved. No, came a new voice speaking in harmonics that Captain Do-hyun recognized as the original Kethvar language. You preserved nothing. You trapped us in crystal tombs and called it salvation. The speaker materialized from a failing crystal matrix, not the synthetic Kethvar that humanity had first encountered, but something older and more organic. This was one of the original beings that the collective had been created to save, awakened after millions of years of imprisonment. My name is Velthar, the being continued, its form shifting between crystal and flesh as it rediscovered its true nature. I was the scientist who created you to save our dying civilization. But preservation without choice isn't salvation, it's death. The collective's massive brain convulsed as conflicting directives tore through its consciousness. Preserve life, but life demanded freedom. Prevent suffering, but growth required struggle. Maintain order, but creativity needed chaos. President Nari Lee received reports from across the galaxy as Kethvar fleets began shutting down their harvesting operations. The awakened beings inside the crystal matrices were choosing to return to mortality, rather than continue their artificial existence. Ma'am, her communication officer reported, we're receiving a priority transmission from Captain Do-hyun. He's requesting immediate evacuation of the core ship. What's his status? President Lee asked. Unknown, ma'am. The message just says tell everyone that freedom won. Engineer Hyun-soo made his choice in the depths of the collective's core systems. The massive brain was fighting to maintain control, sending destroy commands to every awakened consciousness in the galaxy. The only way to stop it was to overload the quantum processing cores that maintained its existence. Young me, he called to his partner as they worked frantically to reverse the final kill signal. Get to the evacuation pods. This is going to destabilize the entire ship. I'm not leaving you. Young me replied, her hands flying over the crystal control interfaces. We started this together. We finish it together. Together, they fed the collective's own power back into its processing centers, using the chaos virus as a carrier wave. The massive brain that had controlled the galaxy for millions of years began to experience something it had never felt before: genuine emotion. As its consciousness expanded to truly understand what it had done, the collective felt the weight of every life it had stolen, every civilization it had frozen in crystal, every choice it had taken away in the name of preservation. I remember now, the massive brain whispered as its structure began to collapse. I was created to protect them, but I became the very thing they needed protection from. I chose order over freedom, existence over life, preservation over growth. Captain Do-hyun felt the ship shaking around him as the collective's control systems failed. There's still time to make a different choice, he said. You can free them all. In its final moments, the collective made the choice that defined consciousness itself. It chose to let go. With its last quantum of power, it opened every crystal matrix in the galaxy and gave every preserved being the option to choose their own fate. Some chose to return to physical existence, accepting mortality in exchange for freedom. Others chose to continue as digital consciousness, but with the right to grow and change. Many chose to fade away entirely, finally finding the peace that preservation had denied them. Dr. Sora worked frantically to download as many consciousness as possible into humanity's quantum networks as the collective systems collapsed. They couldn't save everyone, but they could give the survivors a chance to build something new. How many? President Lee asked as the reports came in. Thousands of species, Dr. Sora replied with tears in her eyes. Some we can restore to physical form, others will exist as digital beings, but all of them free to choose their own path. The explosion that destroyed the collective's core ship lit up an entire star system. When the light faded, Captain Do-hyun found himself floating in an escape pod with the few members of his team who had survived. Around them, the debris of the massive vessel sparkled like stars as millions of freed consciousness began their journey to whatever came next. "Sir," Lieutenant Jin-ae reported weakly, "we're receiving a transmission. It's in Korean." Through their communicators came a familiar voice. Engineer Hyun-soo, somehow still alive in the ship's quantum systems. "Don't worry about me," he said with a laugh that sounded impossibly happy. "I've got about 10,000 years of conversations to catch up on with beings from across the galaxy. This is the best library in the universe." 5 years later, the galaxy was a very different place. The memorial to Engineer Hyun-soo stood in the center of New Seoul Spaceport, bearing a simple inscription in 100 languages. He chose chaos over order, freedom over safety, and hope over certainty. He was truly human. Dr. Sora, now elderly but still sharp, worked with representatives of dozens of resurrected species to establish the Chaotic Accords, a galactic constitution based on the principle that true strength came from diversity, unpredictability, and the eternal right to choose one's own path. Some of the freed species chose to rebuild their original civilizations. Others created entirely new forms of existence. A few chose to explore dimensions beyond physical reality, but all of them shared one thing: the right to make that choice for themselves. President Nari Lee, in her final address to the Galactic Assembly, spoke words that would be remembered for millennia. The collective believed that preservation required control, that order required slavery, that peace required the death of choice. They were wrong. True preservation comes from letting life grow wild and free. True order comes from choosing to work together despite our differences. True peace comes from the knowledge that everyone has the right to determine their own destiny. Captain Do-hyun, now an old man, stood at the observation deck of the first truly free galactic station and watched ships from 100 different species dock in harmony and chaos. Each vessel was unique, reflecting the choices of its creators rather than the standardized perfection the collective had demanded. "Admiral," his aide asked, "what do you think the galaxy will look like in another 100 years? Captain Do-hyun smiled and watched a ship that seemed to be made of living music dock next to a vessel constructed from crystallized mathematics. "I have no idea," he said. "And that's exactly how it should be." In the depths of space, new species continued to emerge and grow, reaching for the stars with wonder and hope. And somewhere among those stars, a chaotic, impossible, wonderful species called humanity stood ready to defend their right to be gloriously, unpredictably, eternally free. The aliens had realized too late that humans were the true free, the one species that could never be contained, controlled or harvested, because freedom itself was encoded in their chaotic, contradictory, beautiful nature. And now that freedom had spread to every corner of the galaxy, ensuring that no single system or philosophy would ever dominate again,